So the first piece of the puzzle is BlackEnergy, and also it is tracked by many of you guys and as under the name of Sandworm because of the cultural references to Dune found in some of their CNC domains being used at that time. So we've been tracking this group for quite a while. Specifically, we're talking about BlackEnergy 2 and BlackEnergy 3 or BlackEnergy Lite. And so the first campaigns, the targeted campaigns of BlackEnergy go back to around 2010. There were numerous campaigns, mostly using spear phishing techniques, but also there was even a zero-day in Microsoft PowerPoint. And these various campaigns, they targeted various high-value targets, mostly focusing on Ukraine. And the second highest number of detections that we detected was in Poland. So there were a number of high-value targets, including government, news media, transportation. But of course, the one that everyone knows the best is the attack against the Ukrainian power grid, which was in December 2015. And it was the first ever malware-induced blackout in history. So that was facilitated by BlackEnergy. And I use the word facilitated really carefully. Because BlackEnergy was used in the first stages of the attacks. It was used in the preparation phases for the reconnaissance, for network traversal, for stealing credentials and stuff like that. And then the culmination of the attack, the actual blackout, happened when the attackers were able to remotely access the critical workstations, get into their SCADA systems, manually pull the plug, using stolen credentials to Radmin, which was a legitimately installed remote access software used at the Ukrainian substations. So this was a very well orchestrated operation, also coordinated, so taking place at different geographical locations at the same time. We know that at least 4 regional electricity distribution substations were targeted. Okay, so that's the first piece of the puzzle, BlackEnergy. And then almost exactly 1 year later, we were struck with a sense of deja vu when there was another blackout. But this time we were pretty shocked and so to say impressed because this was the first ever malware specifically designed to attack power grids, and one of the most sophisticated pieces of malware we've ever encountered. So what makes Indestroyer so interesting was the fact that it was able to speak the language of these hardware devices at this time the transmission substation in the north of Kiev that it was targeting. So these are the devices that it was going after. Protection relays, just 2 examples from Siemens and ABB vendors, which are used not only in Ukraine but also in other parts of the world. So we're sending commands to these devices to open circuit breakers in an endless loop. That was its primary functionality, which in the end de-energized that substation. There was also a lot of additional functionality that amplified that effect. So there was the denial of service functionality against Siemens, exploiting a vulnerability in that. And also there was wiping functionality to make recovery from the attack a lot harder. Speaking of recovery, I think the most interesting part about the Indestroyer attack was the large contrast between the capability of the malware and the actual effect that it had. Because I think we can all agree that with a cyber weapon of such a high caliber, causing a blackout of around 1 hour around midnight is probably not the worst that the attackers could have done. So kudos to the Ukrainians at GreyEnergy for being able to recover so quickly. Okay, so we have the second piece. The last time we saw BlackEnergy in the wild, and I'm not talking about the old BlackEnergy 1 being used for various cybercrime activities, but the targeted, the APT BlackEnergy, was with that first power grid attack in December 2015. And after that, we saw the rise of what we call telebots because of, in their initial phases, this, let's call it a subgroup. So all of these things are related, but we don't know the actual interpersonnel things that are going behind the scenes. So this subgroup, in the early phases, in their early attacks, they were using the Telegram API to communicate with their command and control servers, hence that name. So the most notable attacks of telebots were against the financial sector, the financial industry in Ukraine, and most notably attacks against the Ministry of Finance, the Ukrainian Stock Exchange, the Ukrainian Pension Fund, and so on. So this is one of the campaigns that telebots were using. Again, common scenario of spear phishing. There's an Excel file that contains a malicious macro, and this is one of the connectors, one of the several connectors, the links that we discovered that was linking it to the previous BlackEnergy activity. So there was a large similarity between the macros used by BlackEnergy previously and the telebots macro. So this was in addition to the fact that infrastructure being used to distribute these spear phishing emails was shared between BlackEnergy and later telebots and so on. But also another connecting factor between BlackEnergy and telebots was the destructive functionality that it had. So as a lot of you know, BlackEnergy was also deploying destructive functionality. It actually had a plugin called a destroyer plugin at some point in time, but then it was also deploying a standalone tool called KillDisk for wiping functionality. Now, even though similar wipers are sort of general, is sort of like a general group of malware, these KillDisk samples were pretty specific, and they were also quite tailored to the individual targets that the attackers were going after. For example, the KillDisks that were used against the power grid were specifically shutting down SCADA processes. The KillDisks that were used against a Ukrainian media company at the time of local elections, they were specifically going after media files and so on and so forth. So this KillDisk or another variant of it was used also by telebots against these financial institutions. You can see the targeted file extensions that it was going. And the interesting thing was that when the employees got to work on one morning in these financial institutions, they would discover this on their screen. So any fans of Mr. Robot? So this was from that. But there was also other interesting things. They started getting creative with their destructive functionality, and since ransomware, it was 2016, almost 2017, which became the year of ransomware. It was everywhere. The attackers, they thought it would be a good idea to masquerade their destructive functionality as financially motivated ransomware, which it wasn't. Also, not just because the KillDisk components, they had no way of paying the ransom. They had no way of decrypting the files if the ransom had been paid. And also the ridiculous amount, 222 Bitcoin, at that time being about $250,000. So we came to the conclusion that it was more as a disguise. And there was this example. There was also a version for Linux, which was implemented as a grub loader. So that was also quite interesting. So forward about half a year later, we all know, I think NotPetya needs no introduction here. And that was also the work of this group of telebots. But apart from the fact that the collateral damage that it was able to cause damage to some of the world's largest corporations, man, even when Durex was hit, you knew that nobody was safe from this threat, right? So this obviously was all over the news, and the most interesting aspect, how it was able to spread through Eternal Blue and all of that. But from our perspective, the most interesting part was, it was the most damaging cyber attack in history. But from our point of view, the most interesting part was the link to telebots, which is through Medoc, which was also mentioned earlier. The Medoc backdoor was the work of telebots, and not the only one. So there were also other campaigns being used to spread through this channel. So this was also the connector here, and it'll also play a role later on in GreyEnergy. So XRML, also important piece of the puzzle and a link between different subgroups. It was rumored for quite a long time, and it was the well-believed hypothesis that obviously Indestroyer is also the same work of this group that previously called the first blackout. But there wasn't actually any publicly revealed evidence to support those claims, even though it made sense. I mean, if there's someone attacking the power grid of a country 2 years in a row, it's highly likely that they at least know about one another. But then earlier this year, we discovered XRML, specifically 2 relatively small backdoors being used against one target. There was a Windows backdoor, there was a Linux server version as well. And the reason why it's an important piece of the puzzle is that it was the link that was able to link InDestroyer to Telebot's activity. So on the left, you see the XRML backdoor, and on the right, you see the InDestroyer main backdoor. Okay, so there we have the Telebots piece. And we're going to the main topic of discussion, and that is GreyEnergy, which we consider to be the successor of BlackEnergy. So in terms of victimology, it's very highly targeted. At the moment, we know only of 7 targets. There quite possibly are more, but it is known for a fact that it is very targeted, and they're putting a lot of effort on stealth. So most of these targets are in Ukraine, and the second country which is targeted is Poland, just like the case of BlackEnergy. And also, the most interesting thing is that most of these targets are in the energy sector. Also an interesting fact, at least one of those targets was also previously targeted by BlackEnergy. So now I'm going to pass the microphone to Anton, who will guide you through how it spread and how it works.
So, hello. I will talk about the initial infection vector. First, initial infection vector that they use is a standard spear phishing. This is an example of this spear phishing. It's written in Ukrainian, and it says, please enable macro, and when you enable macro, it infects your computer. So it's pretty standard way. Second, way that they use is more interesting because it's common for large enterprises that have web servers, public-facing web servers that also connected to internal network. And on the screen you see data that captured by our systems. And what you see here, that web server is creating a process of PHP, and this process is creating another process of PowerShell. And you see that something phishing is going on here. And what they use here, they used vulnerable PHP script, and they use it to sneak into internal network. In terms of functionality, the GreyEnergy is very extendable. So we are aware of following models that they used. But the thing is that they never push, the attackers, they never push all models at the same time. So it was hard to collect all these models. We spent a few years to collect them. We don't know, for now, we haven't seen any model that is specifically targets industrial systems. So it's more like standard backdoor functionality like BlackEnergy. There are 2 versions. GreyEnergy Lite is tracked by FireEye as Felix root. It's first stage verification type of backdoor, so it collects as much information about infected system as possible and sends it to attackers, so attackers they can say if the infected system is right system that they intended to infect, and it used same persistent mechanism as BlackEnergy. So one day inside the network, they use following tools for lateral movement. So this is pretty common for all APT groups. In terms of tactics, as I said before, they never push all models to same infected computer. One interesting case we had, they have self-removal functionality, and in one case we had, they removed this malware from whole network, from all computers, because the malware could not access the CNC server for 1 day. So they cleaned the network themselves. So it says that stealth is #1 priority for them. They use internal servers for CNC proxies. This is an example captured by our systems, and sometimes it's even hard to say whether it is malicious or not, even for a company that owns this network. So some system process connects to some internal servers. Is it malicious? They even don't know themselves. And as BlackEnergy, they use CNC servers that also Tor relays. And as we said, they mainly target energy companies, and we have seen that they are focused on computers that are able to control industrial segment. And one interesting case we had, the malware was signed by code signing certificate that was stolen from this Taiwanese-based company called Advantech, and this company does industrial equipment. And we think that this certificate was likely stolen because we have seen also legitimate software that was signed by same certificate. And one interesting event we had in December 2016, half year before NotPetya incident, we have seen on that the GreyEnergy attackers, they used ransomware on small number of computers in one network, and they use worm to infect these computers. So this worm was named by attackers Moonraker. It's probably a reference to James Bond movie and the book. And at that time, they didn't implement MBR infections by themselves. They used original Petya ransomware that is used by cyber criminals. They embedded it in their malware. So once it started to spread, it will execute original, original Petya malware. And we have seen code similarities between NotPetya and GreyEnergy at the same time. And this Moonraker Petya is not largely is not known by security community because it was used only on some small number of computers. So I will pass to Robert.
Yeah, so there we have the last piece that we're aware of as of right now. So yeah, as we said, GreyEnergy, we consider it to be the successor of BlackEnergy and activity operating in parallel, also with telebots. We observed that the targeting is rather different, and likely also the motivation of these subgroups is somewhat different. So whereas telebots, they were mostly focusing on business sort of like targets, financial sector, and then a lot of companies with the NotPetya outbreak, and specifically had destructive capability in mind. GreyEnergy much more resembles the BlackEnergy modus operandi. So more for reconnaissance, more about espionage. And the obvious question is, what's next? What's the purpose of all this activity? And given the similarities with BlackEnergy, it is, I'd say it's not unlikely, and it's quite possible that this serves as a preparation phase for further destructive attacks. So we definitely have to keep our eyes open. And with that, I open for questions.
Sorry, really quick. Can you characterize the targets of GreyEnergy in Poland? Is it more of what you've already said, or is there a distinction?
Energy, yeah, energy companies in Poland. I think that's all the extent that we can say.
Likewise, could you characterize the targets or the small target network in which Moonraker was first observed?
Which target? It was a Ukrainian target, Moonraker. What else? Was this a GreyEnergy one? Was this an energy company, or was this one of the other?
Another company.
It was not an energy company, this particular one.
What flavor?
So the majority of the targets was energy companies, and there were other high-value targets being transportation, governmental entities, and that's, I think, all the verticals that we can say without being too specific.
Can you touch on the ransomware as a cover for a little bit? Because I just find it kind of hard to believe that the actors wouldn't be sophisticated enough if they were using ransomware as a cover that they wouldn't put some sort of decryption method in there. Was it maybe more like ransomware as a, hey, our tasking is to incite, is to destroy and disrupt. Why not make some money while we're at it?
I think it was also one of the decoy moves because ransomware was all over the news at the time, so people would pay less attention to just consider it to be, okay, so this is just another ransomware attack. Okay, we're not paying that ransom. Let's just restore from backups in the better scenario, or just flush and forget our files. That sort of thing. But regarding the bad implementation, that was also the case for NotPetya. I mean, there was so many flaws, so many mistakes in the code. So yeah, also the case of something not being created for financial gain.